Hello everyone, welcome to the second lecture. Today we are going to really just kind of talk about some of the history of early modern psychology. Psychology's been around since human beings were able to rub two brain cells together. But today we're going to look specifically at how modern psychology started. We're going to take a look at a couple of the different schools or perspectives of psychology. And then that'll be it for what we cover here. So to start off, before we even get started, we need to take a look at how would one define psychology? What is the study? How has our definition of psychology changed as time has gone on? And simply put, what we would say today is the science of behavior and mental processes. So what we are looking at is we are looking at both the things that people do and basically what is going on in a person's brain. And as we look at the different schools or perspectives, you'll see that different perspectives believe more in certain aspects of our psychology definition than in others, and we'll kind of come back to that when we get to those different perspectives. So to start things off, the founder of what is known as modern psychology is a psychologist by the name of Wilhelm Wundt. He started this by creating the first psychological laboratory at the University of Leipzig in 1879. Basically, he was a little tired of philosophy. He was a philosophy professor, and he was disappointed at how ephemeral or non-tangential it was. A lot of the concepts was just, he didn't feel that there was a lot of concrete scientific foundation to it. So what he wanted to do is he wanted to really explore, the human condition and the mind and all of that, but he wanted to create something that was more concrete. So what he ended up doing is he created this first laboratory, and he did a lot of work on studying like perception and how we sense and understand things and how we process that information. And a lot of his work came down into what we are going to call our first school or our first perspective of. So Wilhelm Wundt created the first school of psychology, which is known as structuralism. So this was his way of interpreting or attempting to understand how the mind worked. Now, let me take a step back and let me explain what I mean by schools or perspectives. I'll be using the terminology, these words quite a bit. So the idea is that think of a political party. The U.S. is in a massive amount of debt, and political parties, Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, they all have different ideas on how to best solve that problem. So very similarly, the different schools or perspectives are basically just different viewpoints of different groups of people on how to help people who are in trouble mentally, how to understand what is going on with people. So these different perspectives, structuralism being the first of these, is simply just different ways for us to understand what's going on with human beings. So Wilhelm Wundt didn't have any other psychologists to talk to or to bounce ideas off of. So what he did was he looked to other sciences that were in some ways similar, sciences like chemistry and physics, in order to create the foundation for his school of psychology. And so what he really took away, I like to think of chemistry's periodic table. The periodic table is all the known elements that we know of. And what Wilhelm Wundt wanted to do is he wanted to take the mind and he wanted to break it down into its individual parts and study those things, much like the periodic table. He wanted to understand how the brain worked, in its individual pieces. And so that's what he looked to do, was to study it in that method. So the way he did this was a process known as introspection. I'm writing this down because, I just got to get more practice using this function, and I feel like it's not really a video lesson if I don't try doing this at least once. All right, maybe next time I'll use a smaller word. So introspection, it's an N at the end. N, there we go. Okay, so introspection is the vehicle that Wilhelm Wundt used in order to study structuralism. So what I mean by that is this is the methodology that he would use to study patients. Okay, so how this would work, I'll give you the dictionary definition, is he would have the patient look inside themselves, oftentimes giving them some sort of primer, having them imagine a sunset or talk about, something that was, interesting or beautiful, something like that. So you would have them look inside themselves, study, kind of try to understand what was going on, and then to express those feelings to him. And that way he could break down and try to study what was going on. So this was his method. This is the way that he did things: have people look inside themselves, figure out what's going on, and then project or explain what they felt. And the end result was that this doesn't really work. Human beings, some of us are really good at understanding what they're feeling, what emotions are going on, and expressing those. But at the same time, a lot of us are really, really bad. And so the problem scientifically was that people just didn't have a good way of expressing themselves. So too many people just weren't good at this. And when you're trying to fundamentally understand what the brain is doing, when you have, half or more of your people who can't properly express themselves, it doesn't really turn out to be scientifically valid. So the end result is that introspection turned out to be invalid. It didn't work. And so because of this, structuralism is also going to go out the window. So if you're ever going and seeing a therapist and they tell you that the type of therapy they use is based on structuralism, get out. That shouldn't be a thing. They need some more scientific evidence before we can move on with that. So that's structuralism. Now, after structuralism, we have what is known as functionalism. Now, functionalism was started by a student of Wilhelm Wundt, William James. William James basically read, understood, practiced structuralism, and then was like, I don't really agree with all of this. And so he kind of moved in a different direction. So once again, this is just a different viewpoint, a different way of seeing how the human mind works. So functionalism is based on the work of Charles Darwin. So if you remember Charles Darwin, theory of evolution, talking about survival of the fittest, and he took being adaptive. So what William James took was Charles Darwin's theories and then applied it to humans. So you would have a patient that would come in, they were, morbidly obese, something like that. And what William James would say is, all right, so what is the root reason why you are so overweight? And so William James would use evolution to try to track down major issues that people would have. Okay, well, why are you overweight? Well, one of the reasons might be that our ancestors were a hunter-gatherer society, and so the reason why it was so imperative for them to eat everything that they could is because they didn't have refrigerators, or they didn't have good ways of storing meat or food. And so when they got food, they got the opportunity, they ate as much as possible. And so William James would be like, well, you're tapping into, you're being heavily influenced by that, evolutionary drive. You could say the same thing about why do you feel so lonely, or why is it that you have trouble, why do you feel the need to make friends? And he would say, well, go back to, once again, go back to our ancestors. The people that survived were the people that got together in groups. So the people that survived, they passed on their genes, and so the human race, has these certain things, certain quirks about them that has been passed on from generation to generation. So these are the two very early theories or perspectives of psychology. So make sure you know about Wilhelm Wundt, make sure you know William James, and you're also going to need to know the other perspectives, which you guys will have a chance to cover in class. But otherwise, good stuff.